The mist hadn't lifted over Olympic National Park when it happened. A 2-year-old girl, silent since birth, wandered into the tall grass chasing a butterfly. She didn't see the danger. But Sable did, a battle-scarred Mustang once deemed untrainable. And Calder Beckett, a reclusive veteran with nothing left but nightmares and a horse no one trusted, ran toward a moment that would either redeem his past or end it. What happened next wasn't instinct. It was choice. And it changed 3 lives, forever. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The morning mist rolled in from the Strait of Juan de Fuca like a tide of ghosts, soft and low, muffling the world into silence. At the edge of the Olympic National Park, where moss-draped trees whispered over fern-strewn paths and silver fog curled between trunks like smoke from an ancient fire, Calder Beckett adjusted the lead rope in his hand and muttered, "Just one loop, that's all, girl." The horse beside him flicked an ear but said nothing, as horses do. She was a grizzled Mustang mare named Sable, 12 years old, gray with soot-dark legs, and a single white blaze that curved like lightning between her eyes. Her left shoulder bore an old Bureau of Land Management frieze brand, now faded by years and weather. Sable was once called untrainable, unfit for therapy, until Calder took her in. Together, they had survived war zones of a different kind, one of blood and bullets, the other of sleepless nights and screaming memories. Calder, now 40, stood with the posture of a man still listening for snipers in his sleep. He was broad-shouldered but lean, his once copper hair now streaked with gray. A jagged scar traced down the left side of his neck, just enough to peek from beneath his flannel collar. His eyes, sharp steel blue, were too tired for his age, rimmed with the hollowness of someone who had seen one too many final breaths. PTSD, the doctors called it. Calder didn't care for the term. It felt too clean. War was never clean. Not Kandahar, not Fallujah, not the village with the child and the missing limb. The annual family day at the park brought crowds, but Calder had promised his therapist he'd try. Just the morning, he said. Just a short ride along the tree line. That was 3 hours ago. The loop had become a slow drift along the northern edge of the sanctuary, where the fences were double-lined and the paths dipped into shaded glades. Sable moved calmly, picking her steps with quiet dignity, ears twitching at birdsong and the distant laughter of children from the main event area. At the center of the park, banners fluttered. Food trucks lined the trails near the visitor center, and children with paper crowns chased bubbles through the grass. But Calder avoided the bustle. He always did. At the butterfly garden near the south gate, June Holiday maneuvered her wheelchair into place beneath a flowering dogwood tree. At 36, June had the kind of quiet charisma that made strangers speak to her without meaning to. She was slim and tall despite her seated frame, her dark hair cut into a neat bob, and her glasses always slightly askew from Willa's curious fingers. She had been the park's head of environmental education for nearly 6 years, known for her vibrant outdoor talks and her fierce commitment to accessibility. June's spinal cord injury came a year ago during a storm evacuation, a fallen branch, a flipped cart, and a moment that divided her life in two. But she didn't let it stop her. "Nothing takes root in bitterness," she often said, quoting a Thoreau line she'd once painted above her classroom whiteboard. Her daughter, Willa Holiday, toddled ahead through the butterfly garden. 2 years old, Willa had never spoken a full sentence. Diagnosed with a developmental delay affecting speech, she relied on touch, expression, and gestures. Her blonde curls bounced with every step, and her wide hazel eyes seemed to take in more than the average child's. June said Willa listened with her soul. Today, Willa wore a red fleece jacket and clutched a stuffed monarch butterfly in one hand. As June pointed out caterpillars on a milkweed stalk, her radio crackled. A minor medical issue near the central pavilion, a heat-struck elderly visitor. Protocol required June's presence. She looked around and spotted Claire Fremont, a teenage volunteer in a park-issued vest, standing near the bench. Claire, 17, was tall, freckled, and distracted. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she looked between Willa and a group of kids trying to climb a sculpture. "Claire," June called, "can you watch Willa for 5 minutes? There's a call from the med tent." Claire nodded, though her gaze drifted. "Yes, ma'am." June hesitated, maternal instinct battling duty, then wheeled away with a final glance back. "Stay with Miss Claire, Willa. Mommy'll be right back." The moment June disappeared down the path, a monarch butterfly flitted through the garden, wings bright as fire. Willa gasped, dropped her stuffed toy, and followed. She didn't run. She never did. She moved with silent determination, each step after the butterfly drawing her closer to the unmarked service trail between the garden and the Mustang sanctuary. The gate, meant to stay locked, had been left ajar by a rushed maintenance worker that morning. No one noticed the breeze catch it. No one saw Willa slip through the opening. No one, except for one creature on the other side. His name was Ghost. 8 years old, Ghost was a stallion the color of storm clouds with pale eyes like desert bone. He had come to the sanctuary 6 months earlier from a shut-down roadside zoo where he had been kept in isolation, abused for years, made to perform tricks for food. He did not trust people. He did not come to fences. Ghost watched, always, but never approached. His file read, aggressive, handle with caution, rehabilitation uncertain. But no one knew he had learned to unlatch his gate. That morning a handler forgot to check the secondary bolt. Ghost, triggered by the noise of the crowd and the scent of unfamiliar animals, had paced in agitation until the latch gave. He slipped through the fence like a shadow, unnoticed, into the grasslands. Into the same field now welcoming a red-jacketed girl. Back on the northern ridge, Sable stopped mid-step. Calder furrowed his brow. "What is it?" he whispered. The mare shifted her weight, ears forward, nose twitching. Then she moved. Calder held tight to the rope, boots crunching leaves as she pulled him down the slope. Not a trot, but a determined walk. The kind she used when sensing something far off, a thunderstorm, a cougar, a body in need of help. Through the mist, Calder saw a flicker of red. A child. Alone. And something else, a darker shape slinking near the edge of the tall grass. His breath caught. He dropped the rope. Sable bolted forward. And Calder Beckett, a man who thought he'd left his final mission behind in a desert half a world away, followed her into the fog. Sable's hooves struck the damp soil with purpose, not panic. Calder Beckett ran after her, his boots digging into the slick, moss-laced ground, lungs burning against the morning chill. The fog was thinning but still clung in pale threads across the slope, a curtain through which shapes could only be half seen. Somewhere ahead, a silent alarm had been sounded between beast and instinct. Something was wrong. "Easy," Calder muttered, more to himself than to her. But the mare didn't stop. She moved like a compass pulled by a true north only she could sense. He trusted her. They had learned each other in silence, across endless weeks in New Mexico's rehabilitation program. Calder had been broken in places no X-ray could read, and Sable, rescued from a roundup gone wrong, had refused every saddle, every hand, until Calder, just another shell of a soldier, had walked into her pen and simply sat. For hours, for days, until finally, the mare stepped close, sniffed his hair, and lowered her head. Now, years later, she ran again, this time toward someone else's war. Through the thinning mist, a flicker of red appeared. Not a warning, not blood, but a jacket, small, moving. Calder's breath caught in his throat. It was the child, the little girl. Willa. She toddled forward through thigh-high grass, each step determined but unsure, following something invisible to him. Calder scanned the edges of the meadow. Something else was here. His instincts screamed it. Then he saw it. Ghost. The Mustang stallion stepped from the tall grass like a living phantom. Storm gray coat glistening with dew, white mane tangled with brambles, and eyes wild, hollow, gold-flecked, locked onto the child. Not with malice, not even hunger, just disorientation, fear. The same look Calder had seen in the eyes of men fresh from an ambush, the unmoored gaze of creatures severed from their bearings. Calder didn't move, neither did Sable. The mare stood tall, ears pointed forward, her body trembling with restrained energy. Willa turned, finally seeing Ghost. She gasped, delighted, and took a stumbling step toward him. In the park's visitor center, June Holiday wheeled into the security wing, her heart already clenching. Something was wrong. She felt it in the base of her spine, phantom nerves sparking beneath the paralysis. She looked at the clock. 18 minutes since she'd left Willa. Too long. Claire Fremont wasn't at the bench. "Where's my daughter?" June asked, voice sharp. The security guard on duty, Frank Ashland, mid-50s, bald, stout, and perpetually calm, stood from his desk. "Let's check the cameras." Frank had worked in the park for nearly 3 decades. Once a sheriff's deputy in Pierce County, he'd left law enforcement after a hostage situation ended badly. The park gave him peace. Rules were followed. Visitors smiled. Until today, they watched the replay. June stared as her daughter followed the butterfly. She's headed toward the service path. Frank's jaw tightened. That runs along the Mustang sanctuary. Ghost is there, June whispered, dread blooming. Frank picked up his radio. Unit 7, we've got a missing child. Red jacket, 2 years old. Last seen headed toward East Meadow by Butterfly Garden. Possible contact with Mustangs. Full alert. The radio crackled back instantly. Unit 5 en route, initiating search protocol. June turned toward the door. Ma'am, Frank said gently, we'll find her. June didn't reply. She was already wheeling out. On the meadow, the wind shifted. Ghost snorted, his muscles twitching beneath his hide. He was close now, too close. Willa reached out a hand toward his nose, tiny and brave, the way a child might offer a daisy to a lion. Calder stepped forward, slow. He counted the space between them, 20 yards. Sable mirrored him. She didn't charge. She placed herself between Ghost and the girl, head low, body loose, but legs coiled like a spring. Calder raised a hand, palm out, voice calm. Easy there, boy. I know that look. He did. He had seen it in every mirror after every night waking up soaked in sweat. He remembered the noise, the pressure in his ears, the flash of bodies. He remembered being told by his CO that he'd done the right thing, that he'd followed orders. But orders didn't quiet the dead. Sable made a low, soft rumble, a sound not unlike a lullaby made by thunder. Ghost flinched, then stepped back. At the other edge of the meadow, a woman in Forest Ranger green jogged to a halt. Ranger Danielle Danny Reyes, 29, short, muscular, Latina, with a dark braid and quicker reflexes than her temper. She crouched behind a thicket, watching the standoff. Her hand hovered over her tranquilizer rifle. She spoke softly into her radio. Eyes on child and 2 Mustangs. One unknown male approaching. Stallion looks agitated but not attacking, holding fire. Danny had seen Ghost's intake file. She had argued against placing him so close to the public trail, but policy wasn't hers to write, only to enforce. She adjusted her grip. 1 shot. That's all she'd get. In the grass, Willa took another step. Ghost backed up. Sable advanced. Calder moved into the triangle, angling to come behind Willa. She turned at his presence, curious. She didn't speak, didn't run, just studied him, tilting her head. He knelt, arms open. Hey there, he said gently. That's a good girl. You're very brave. She blinked. Behind her, Ghost twitched, startled by a sound from the forest. Raven's cry, wind in the pines. He bucked, hooves pounding earth, and bolted sideways into the tree line. Sable didn't flinch. Calder scooped Willa up. She clung to his neck, her fingers knotting into the fabric of his jacket. Behind them, Danny lowered her rifle, exhaled, and radioed. Child secure. Man has her. Mustang retreated. No shots fired. At that moment, June reached the edge of the clearing, her breath shallow from effort. When she saw Willa in the arms of a stranger, safe unharmed, she let out a sound that was neither relief nor sob, but something older, something primal. Calder Beckett knelt in the tall grass, Willa safe in his arms, her small frame pressed against his chest like a fragile heartbeat. Sable stood beside them, unmoving, a statue carved from the land itself. Her body blocked the retreating figure of Ghost. The Mustang stallion now half vanished into the tree line, but not fully gone. His golden eyes still glinted between the branches, flickering like twin flames between fear and memory. Sable did not chase. She simply watched. Calder's breath came slowly, deliberately, fighting the old urge to flee or freeze. His hand rose, fingers brushing Willa's back, a calming rhythm without words. She didn't cry. She hadn't made a sound the whole time. Just held him with the quiet grip of someone who knew silence not as absence, but as language. The clearing buzzed with radios. From opposite sides of the meadow, rangers closed in, but Calder didn't move. Not yet. Ghost was still watching. For a long moment, their eyes locked, man and horse. And in that suspended stillness, Calder saw something deeper in the stallion, beyond the panic, beyond the wildness. Recognition, not of him, but of something he carried. The way he moved, the quiet he kept, the weight of loss unspoken. Ghost stepped forward, then back again, conflicted, not ready to disappear. A voice broke the moment. Mr. Beckett? It was Ranger Danny Reyes emerging from the thicket, rifle lowered but still alert. She approached cautiously, glancing between the man, the child, and the Mustang. Is the child unharmed? Calder stood slowly, Willa still in his arms. She's okay. Not a scratch. Danny exhaled. And Ghost? Hurt? Calder shook his head. No, just haunted. As other rangers moved to secure the area, June appeared at the edge of the meadow, pushing herself through the grass with arms that trembled with both exhaustion and terror. Her eyes locked on her daughter, and her lips parted in a soundless gasp. Willa stirred and lifted her head. She reached one small hand toward her mother, her fingers flexing in a pattern June knew intimately. I'm safe now. Sarah Reeves stepped forward beside June, placing a steadying hand on the wheelchair handle. Tall and thin with silver-streaked hair tied in a low braid, Sarah looked like a watercolor painting come to life. Subtle, composed, and gentle in a way that made people trust her on sight. She was June's closest friend and Willa's godmother. In another life, Sarah had been a child psychologist, specializing in trauma. That life had shifted 3 years ago when her teenage son took his own life after a long battle with depression. Since then, Sarah had become quieter, slower to speak, but when she did, her words carried weight. Now she crouched beside June and whispered, "She's all right. Look." June wheeled faster, nearly stumbling as she reached Calder. "May I?" Calder nodded and gently passed Willa to her mother. The girl immediately curled into June's lap, pressing her face into her mother's scarf. June held her tight. Sarah looked at Calder. "Thank you," she said simply. Danny raised her radio, requesting vet support to track and recapture escaped Mustang. "Tranquilizers on standby." "No," Calder said sharply. Everyone turned. He stepped forward, eyes still on the edge of the trees. "If you shoot him now, you'll break something that might not heal." Danny frowned. "He's a safety risk." "I know horses," Calder replied. "That one's on the edge, but he doesn't need a dart. He needs a reason to trust." Sarah tilted her head. "You've trained them before?" "Mustangs, yes," Calder said, then glanced toward Willa. "And I've seen what happens when you try to force a scared creature back into a cage." The group went silent. Sarah looked at Danny, who nodded reluctantly. "We'll give him time, but not much. If he crosses toward public space again, I understand." As the group began to disperse, Calder turned and walked toward Sable. The mare waited patiently, eyes still locked on the trees. Calder laid a hand on her withers, his voice low. "Good girl. You held the line." Behind them, Ghost remained still, half shadow, half specter, lingering just long enough to watch Sable nuzzle Calder's arm. Later that afternoon, Calder found himself sitting in a low-slung canvas chair behind the ranger station. A mug of black coffee cooled in his hands. Across from him, Sarah Reeves settled beside a garden bed full of sagebrush and lavender. The air smelled of rain and resin. "You knew Harley, didn't you?" she asked. Calder blinked. "Harley? Harley Reeve, June's brother, my nephew, Ghost's first trainer." "I didn't know him personally," Calder said slowly, "but I've read about him. Conservationist out of Oregon, specialized in Mustang behavior." Sarah nodded, eyes clouded. "He died trying to get Ghost out of a roadside zoo. Semi-truck accident. Winter storm on the way to a new sanctuary. Ghost survived the wreck. Harley didn't." Calder exhaled. "I'm sorry." "He believed in kindness above control," she said softly. "Said some horses only trust once. You lose it, it's gone forever." Calder stared out toward the tree line. He was right. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Photos slipped out, one of Harley with Ghost as a colt, another of the stallion standing in sunlight, his coat still unmarred by scars. "We thought Ghost was gone after the accident, but someone sold him under the table. Took us years to find him again." Calder sifted through the pages. Ghost's intake report. A note in Harley's handwriting on the back of one. "If he makes it out, he'll need someone with silence in their soul." Sarah smiled faintly. "I think he meant you." The storm didn't come from the sky. It came from the rustling of a body too large and too wild to be held by fences or memory. Ghost stood stiff-legged at the far edge of the meadow, heaving, foam frothing at the corners of his mouth. The wild in him wasn't aggression, it was terror sharpened to a razor edge. His head swung violently as voices rose nearby, a perimeter tightening without understanding what it was corralling. Calder Beckett had just started walking Ghost's old intake path with Sarah Reeves' folder tucked beneath his arm when it happened. They'd moved the conversation out toward the open, hoping Ghost might approach on his own terms. The stallion was half visible in the tree shadows, watching, not yet deciding. Sable stood tethered nearby, calm but aware. The grass rustled gently in the early breeze, and the sun, finally freed from morning fog, painted the meadow gold. Then someone shouted. Frank Ashland, the security officer with a badge worn more from weather than use, stepped onto the field without waiting for clearance. He wasn't fast. Frank was broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, pushing 60. But his voice, used to breaking up panicked crowds and rowdy teens, cut like a whip across the quiet. "Move aside," he barked. "That horse is unstable." Ghost reared. Not all the way. A half lift of front legs, but enough to slice the calm in half. His eyes flashed white, ears pinned. "Stop!" Calder shouted, dropping the folder and stepping between Ghost and the ranger. "Back off! You're pushing him." But it was too late. The stallion's body coiled like a spring. Calder didn't think. He acted. He turned, caught sight of Sable, and with a firm grasp lifted Willa, still curled peacefully in her mother's scarf, and placed her onto the mare's back. "Go," he growled. Sable didn't hesitate. She surged forward in a powerful, deliberate gallop toward the ranger station, where June waited, her eyes wide, her arms ready. Behind them, Calder felt the air shift. The energy around Ghost twisted. A hoof struck out. It wasn't aimed. It wasn't hatred. It was panic in its purest form. It hit Calder in the ribs with the force of a wrecking ball. The world tilted, then dropped. He fell sideways, crumpling into the tall grass. His vision blurred, all sounds sucked into a tunnel of heartbeat and static. He heard his own breath exit his lungs in a ragged groan, followed by the dull snap of something giving way inside his chest. A few feet away, Ghost staggered. His strength gave out as adrenaline crashed. He stumbled once, then folded, his legs buckling awkwardly beneath him. The stallion collapsed into the earth, not unconscious, but unmoving, spent, chest rising in ragged gasps. Sable reached the perimeter with Willa still steady on her back, reins caught gently in her teeth. A young park aide, Callie Myers, barely 20, fresh-faced and full of nerves, stepped forward just in time to catch Willa as Sable slowed to a walk. Callie, auburn-haired and freckled like an autumn field, was still in training, but something about this child made her hands steady. "She's okay," Callie said breathlessly, as June rolled forward to collect her daughter. Willa reached toward her mother, her fingers unfurling slowly, then suddenly darting into the small pouch on her coat. She pulled out a piece of blue paper, crumpled but still intact, an origami butterfly. She turned in the saddle and looked toward the field, toward Calder's fallen form, and the stallion lying beyond him. She didn't speak, she never did, but she held up the butterfly in both hands like a prayer. One ranger stepped toward her to guide her down, but June waved him off. "Let her," she said quietly. Willa climbed down from Sable with the awkward grace of a toddler and toddled back toward Calder, the butterfly clutched in her small fist. Every step was deliberate. When she reached his side, she bent and placed the butterfly on Calder's chest, just over his heart. Then, gently, she touched her palm to his cheek. A gesture like punctuation. "You see me, and I see you." Danny Reyes had arrived by now, tranquilizer rifle lowered, eyes scanning the scene. She approached Ghost carefully, crouching near his flank. "He's not sedated," she murmured, "just crashed." Behind her came Dr. Nolan Hart, the park's lead veterinarian. In his late 40s, with sun-cracked skin, wind-frayed hair, and hands that moved with the certainty of someone who'd stitched wounds in windstorms, Nolan knelt beside Ghost. "He's not going to get up soon," he said grimly. "Dehydrated, stressed. If we darted him earlier, it could have killed him." Calder stirred then, coughing. A grimace sliced across his face as he tried to sit. Danny placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Don't. You took the full kick." "Is she safe?" Calder rasped. "She's safe," Danny nodded. "You got her out." Sarah stepped in beside them, brushing grass from his hair. "You're not just a horse whisperer, Beckett. You're a damn shield." Calder chuckled weakly, then winced. "Tell that to my ribs." The paramedics arrived a minute later, led by Emerson Lee, a tall, sharply built medic with salt and pepper hair and cool, efficient hands. Emerson was known for his no-nonsense demeanor, but had a soft spot for veterans, having once served in the Coast Guard. "We'll get you patched," he said, checking Calder's vitals. "You're lucky. If that hoof had been an inch higher." "I've been hit worse," Calder murmured. "Don't make a competition out of trauma," Emerson replied. As they loaded Calder onto the stretcher, Sable stood nearby, ears forward, her eyes locked on her rider. She made a low, aching sound in her throat, something between a whinny and a moan. Willa walked to her again and patted her flank gently. Her other hand still held another butterfly, one yet to be given. It had been 12 days since the kick, since the blood, since the wind in Calder Beckett's lungs turned sharp with pain and the world fell sideways beneath him. Now, sunlight pooled across the recovery ward at Clowen Bay Medical, sliding over clean sheets, IV bags, and a pair of well-worn boots resting on the floor beside his bed. The morning held a salt-laced breeze through the half-open window, an offering from the Pacific, soft and alive. Calder lay still, ribs bound in tight bandages, shoulders sutured, the raw ache in his back a reminder of both impact and grace. The doctor said the hoof had missed his kidney by an inch. That kind of luck wasn't earned, it was borrowed, and Calder had lived long enough to know borrowed things had to be paid back. A quiet knock at the door broke the silence. Sarah Reeves stepped in, carrying a paper bag and a Tupperware container. She looked as always, tall, slim, dressed in warm grays and pale blues that made her appear as steady as a Pacific cliff. Her hands, though aged, moved with precise gentleness, the kind forged in the fire of loss. "I brought soup," she said softly, "and the blue butterfly you forgot." She held up the folded origami that Willa had given Calder before the stretcher wheeled him away. "She's kept making more since then. The cabin wall's starting to look like a migration." Calder grinned, though it tensed his side. "She's a quiet force, that one." "She is," Sarah nodded, "but today she wasn't." Calder arched a brow. Sarah took a seat beside him. They held the dedication this morning, small gathering. Danny gave the welcome speech. Dr. Hart read a poem. Her voice softened. "And Willa?" She walked up to Sable, laid her hand on her nose and said, "Thank you, horse." The words struck Calder like a second breath. He sat straighter, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "She spoke?" Sarah smiled, the eyes glistening. "First words anyone's ever heard from her. June said she whispered sometimes in her sleep, but never out loud. Not until today." Calder leaned back, heart full and uncertain how to hold it all. "She didn't need to speak," he murmured. "She's always been listening." "And so have you," Sarah added. That afternoon they wheeled Calder onto the observation deck. The hospital overlooked the sea, where seabirds carved the sky and the wind carried the sound of waves pounding distant cliffs. Waiting for him by the railing stood June Holiday and Willa. June's wheelchair was decked in butterfly stickers, and Willa wore a vest made of stitched canvas labeled Junior Wildlife Friend. Willa ran to him the moment she saw him. Calder braced as she reached his knees and held up another origami butterfly, this one orange and gold. "Thank you," she whispered again. Her voice still had the fragile ring of a bell not yet tuned, but it was music nonetheless. June joined them, her hands wrapped around a thin manila folder. "I wanted you to have this," she said, offering it to Calder. Inside were old pencil sketches, detailed, textured, expressive. One showed Ghost as a young colt, his mane wind-swept, standing in a field. Another depicted a figure, tall, lean, holding out a hand to a half-wild horse. "Carly drew these the night before the trip," June explained. "He wanted to build something more than just rescue. He wanted to start a therapy program, one where wild animals and wounded people could meet halfway." Calder flipped to the last page. In Harley's looping scrawl was a simple title, "Hearts Without Halters." "We want to do it," June said, voice tight with restrained emotion. "In his name, with your help." Calder stared at the page for a long time, then turned to look at Sable, who stood just below on the lawn, her reins held by Callie Myers. The young park aide had taken to grooming her each morning and always spoke to her as if she could understand every word. Maybe she could. "She already started without us," Calder said, motioning toward the mare. "You know she's been approved, right?" June nodded. "First honorary equine therapy animal in Olympic Park history. They even gave her a badge." From the path behind them, Danny Reyes approached, wearing her ranger uniform crisp and sharp despite the salt in the air. "And don't forget," she added, "we've secured state funding for the pilot version of the program. 3 months, 10 veterans. You'll be our first trainer, if you're ready." Calder looked around. The sea, the woman who had lost her brother, the girl who had learned to speak with horses before she ever used her voice, the quiet, dogged ranger who had once held a tranquilizer rifle and now held a clipboard of approvals. "I'm ready," he said, 1 week later, Calder stood once again on park soil, slightly hunched from healing, but walking unassisted. He watched as the trailer carrying Ghost turned onto the gravel road leading toward Oregon. Nolan Hart had arranged the transfer to a Mustang rehabilitation center near Ashland. It was a place with high grass, open skies, and no more bars. The people there knew not to reach before being invited. Ghost had risen days after the incident, bones sore but not broken. The first thing he did upon standing was find Sable in the paddock and rest his nose against hers. No fight, no sound, just stillness. They remained like that for hours. Callie had begun visiting both daily, scribbling in a journal between grooming and feedings. She'd changed since the incident, more grounded, less distracted, eyes deeper than her age. Calder had asked if she wanted to intern for the program. She'd cried and said yes. Before the trailer rolled away, Ghost turned his head. He looked directly at Calder, then lowered his head. Not submission, not farewell, just acknowledgement. Sable watched too, her ears twitching once. She did not chase the trailer. She didn't need to. The herd they were building now would be made of something stronger than bloodline, shared quiet, earned trust. Later that afternoon, a plaque was unveiled at the Butterfly Garden. It bore Harley Reeves' name. Below it, a line: "He saved one horse to save 100 more, and through them, healed the broken things no words ever could." Willa sat beside Calder during the ceremony, her fingers tracing the edge of a butterfly etched in bronze. She leaned into his side, her small body weightless against his. "Horse is home," she whispered again. Calder smiled. "Yes, little one," he said. "So are we." Sometimes the ones who heal us don't speak our language. A silent child, a wounded horse, a veteran with more scars than stories, they came together not by fate but by something deeper. The quiet understanding that pain is real, but so is recovery. In a world that moves fast and forgets easy, this story reminds us that healing isn't always loud. It can be a touch, a breath, a single whispered thank you. In your own life, you may pass by someone carrying invisible weight. Maybe it's you. But take heart. There is still beauty waiting at the edge of pain. Sometimes, all it takes is a small act of courage to begin again. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment to tell us what part touched you most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Every view, every voice helps keep these stories alive.